Many Canadians pride themselves on multiculturalism being part of our national identity. But what does that word really mean? And is harmony among so many different cultures possible? Well, Professor Kalyani Thurairajah is here to explain. Thank you so much, Kalyani, for being here today. Now, you say multiculturalism is a myth. Is it, and why?
I don't say it's a myth as in it's completely impossible or outside the realm of possibility, but I think it is a myth in that we haven't actually developed a universal definition for the term, which is what leads to a lot of people then feeling like, is multiculturalism failing? Do we even have multiculturalism? Or on the other side, saying, yes, this is multicultural when in fact it is not.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. We need to understand the definition of multiculturalism. Now, many people hear multiculturalism and assume this means equality. What needs to change in order to understand fully what multiculturalism means?
I think before we can fully understand what multiculturalism means, we need to understand what it is not.
Mm.
Uh, Sometimes the assumption with multiculturalism is that everything goes and everyone can practice what they want in terms of their culture. They can speak whatever language they want, as if we've created a society with all of these silos. But that's not what multiculturalism, at least in a Canadian context, is supposed to mean. It's supposed to mean that when people are coming in, no matter where they're coming from, no matter what their cultural values are, they have a place here. And those cultural values are going to be celebrated for the diversity it brings, while they're also expected to integrate into whatever it means to be Canadian. The issue is, of course, that Canadians struggle, as opposed to our counterparts, our neighbors to the south, in terms of defining what it means to be Canadian in the first place. So sometimes then, when people are practicing varying cultural values, we say, oh, you're not being Canadian. And they say, but I thought being Canadian meant that I could do that, which is what leads to that tension about whether or not multiculturalism is a success or a failure.
Yeah. In your estimation, what would you say? Is multiculturalism a success or a failure in this country?
Despite the fact that I study things like multiculturalism and racism, I am an optimist. So I'd like to believe that it could be a success. I don't think in its current form it is a success. And the reason for that is because here in Canada, we don't like to talk about the fact that we do have an identity. And if we could just come out and say, this is what it means to be Canadian, then we would have an easier time recognizing when people are being oppositional to that or not. But because we don't clearly articulate what it means, we start to get upset when we think that all of these other people and these other groups are celebrating their cultures, but what about ours? And of course, then the question is, well, what is your culture? What does it mean to be Canadian? Tell me what it means before you tell me that I'm not being Canadian enough.
Yeah. What would you say is the relationship between racism then and multiculturalism, or just the struggle to understand what true multiculturalism looks like?
I think often people see those things as if they are mutually exclusive. So if there is multiculturalism, there cannot be racism. If there is racism, then clearly there is no multiculturalism. And the truth is that that is not the case. Um, Racism exists when there is fear um, and discrimination against those who are different from you, right? So we can celebrate things like having samosas and sushi and say how multicultural we are while still being racist against Indians who make those samosas and Japanese Canadians who create those sushis for us. So oftentimes people think that because we're so multicultural, we cannot be racist, but that is not at all the case.
Can you also explain the difference between multiculturalism and interculturalism?
Yes, so there are some countries, and Quebec as our province, who have rejected multiculturalism because they believe that multiculturalism doesn't have a strong enough center and it equally prioritizes all groups and all values. And they say, well, no, that's not the case. There is a center here, and we want people to come in and adopt some of those central values while being able to maintain their own. So interculturalism has a centralized set of values that are also supposed to be prioritized more than anything else. Multiculturalism doesn't like to explicitly talk about the center. So it suggests that all of these groups are equal, which upsets certain societies, especially societies that have very strong traditions, have a very clear sense of who they are, what they stand for, what their cultural beliefs and values are. And they don't want other groups coming in and saying, well, my values and beliefs are just as important as yours in this society.
All right. I feel like I just sat in one of your lectures or in your classroom. Thank you so much, Professor Kalyani Thurairajah, for your time today.